The tow truck was already hooked up when Robert Haig walked out of the hospital's side entrance. He noticed it the way he noticed most things, quietly, without alarm. The chain was wrapped around the front axle of his pickup, a '09 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror and rust along the wheel wells. The driver of the tow truck was checking something on a clipboard. A woman in a charcoal blazer stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with the particular expression of someone who had already made up her mind and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. Robert stopped on the sidewalk. He set down the bag he was carrying, a reusable grocery bag with a zipper that had broken 2 winters ago. Inside it was a thermos, a sandwich from Tim Hortons wrapped in the paper bag, and a manila folder he'd been reviewing on his lunch break. "That your truck?" the woman asked. "It is," Robert said. She looked at him the way people sometimes did when they saw him outside of context. Work boots, a Carhartt jacket washed so many times the canvas had gone soft. A face that didn't give much away. She looked at the truck, then back at him, as if reassessing whether the question had been worth asking. "This is a reserved zone," she said. "Physicians and executive staff only. The sign is posted clearly." "The sign was down last Thursday," Robert said. "They were repaving the curb. It's up now." He looked at the sign. It was up now. He nodded slowly. "I'll move it," he said. "It's already been dispatched," the woman said. "Policy." Her name was Sandra Keating. Robert would learn this later. At that moment, she was simply a woman in a blazer, standing between him and a problem he was going to have to solve in the next 4 hours, because he needed the truck to pick up his daughter from her occupational therapy appointment across the city, and there was no bus route that covered both ends of that trip within the window he had. He didn't say any of that. He asked, "Who do I speak with to resolve this?" "Facilities management," she said. "3rd floor. But the truck goes to the impound lot regardless. That's not something I can change." The tow truck driver finished with the clipboard and handed Robert a yellow copy. Robert folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said to the driver. He said it without irony. Then he turned and walked back into the hospital. The 3rd floor of Humber Ridge Medical Center smelled like floor cleaner and recycled air. Robert had been in this building often enough over the past 3 years that he'd stopped noticing the smell. He knew which elevator was fastest, which water fountain dispensed cold rather than tepid, which exit let him avoid the main lobby when he was running late. He worked in the hospital the way certain men work, without announcement, without looking for recognition, fitting himself around the schedule of the institution rather than expecting the institution to fit around him. His name was on the electrical maintenance contracts, had been for 11 years. His company, small and deliberately so, held the service agreement for 3 buildings on the campus. He had never mentioned this to anyone who hadn't needed to know. Facilities management was run by a man named Ted Okafor, who had the exhausted patience of someone who managed 17 competing problems at any given moment. Ted knew Robert. He looked up from his desk when Robert appeared in the doorway. "Haig," he said. "Someone had my truck towed," Robert said. Ted sat back. "Where were you parked?" "Reserved zone, south side entrance. The sign was down last week. Was it still down today?" Robert paused. "No." Ted spread his hands in a gesture that wasn't unsympathetic. "I can give you the impound address. Eastgate on Weston Road. But I can't override the tow. That goes through building administration." "Who in building administration?" Ted's expression shifted slightly. "That would be the COO, Sandra Keating. She's been on a compliance push this month." He paused. "She's also the one who probably called it in." Robert nodded. He took out the yellow impound slip and looked at it for a moment. "I need the truck by 3, he said. "Eastgate processes fast," Ted said. "If you get there before 2, you should be fine." Robert thanked him and left. He took the stairs down to the lobby, calculating. The Uber to the impound lot, the fee, probably $185 to $240, depending on the lot. Then across the city to the therapy clinic by 3, he'd make it. He'd make it, and it would cost him an afternoon and a few $100s he hadn't planned to spend. And none of it would accomplish anything except getting back to where he was this morning. He was at the main lobby doors when he heard his name. Not the name people here used for him. Not Bob from maintenance or the electrical guy. His full name said by someone who was reading it off something. "Robert Haig? From Haig Technical?" He turned. A young man in a white dress shirt was walking toward him quickly, holding a tablet. He looked about 26, maybe younger, with the slightly panicked energy of someone whose morning had not gone according to plan. "That's me," Robert said. "I've been trying to reach you since 9, the young man said. He stuck out his hand. "Patrick Ing, I'm with the board liaison office. There's a meeting. Right now, actually. Well, in 20 minutes. He looked at Robert's jacket, the bag, the general presentation of a man who had just come from having his truck towed. His expression remained professionally neutral, though it took some effort. "You're here for the Meridian Review?" Robert looked at him. "I am," he said. 3 years ago, Robert Haig had retired from Haig Technical Services only in the administrative sense. He had moved his name off the day-to-day operations, handed those to his operations manager, a capable woman named Frances Chu, who had been running the company functionally for 2 years before the title caught up to reality. He still owned 100% of the company. He still signed the contracts that mattered. He just no longer carried the radio. The electrical maintenance contract with Humber Ridge Medical Center was one of 11 active contracts. It was not the largest. It was not the most complex. But 18 months ago, when the hospital began the process of being acquired by Meridian Health Partners, a private equity group out of Toronto with 6 other hospital assets in Ontario, the due diligence review had flagged Haig Technical's contract as a long-term infrastructure liability. The concern was that a single vendor arrangement for electrical systems represented a concentration risk. The recommendation had been to re-tender. Robert had received the letter. He had read it. He had not at that point done anything with it. What he had done over the following months was finish reading the Meridian acquisition documents, all 460 pages, including the appendices, because he had a habit, developed over 30 years, of reading things carefully before deciding what they meant. What he found on page 341 in Appendix F was a clause. It was not a dramatic clause. It was not the kind of thing that would make headlines. It was 11 lines of standard legal text governing the transfer of operational contracts in the event of a change of control event. The clause stipulated that any service contract predating the acquisition date and continuously renewed without interruption for a period of 8 or more years would be subject to the legacy vendor protections outlined in Schedule 7 of the Ontario Health Facilities Act. Robert's contract with Humber Ridge had been renewed without interruption for 11 years. He had not called a lawyer. He had not called the hospital. He had made a note in a document he kept on his laptop, and then he had gone back to his regular work, which that week included replacing a faulty relay switch in the West Wing HVAC system. The meeting Patrick Ing was now escorting him toward, with the slightly dazed efficiency of a man moving faster than his understanding, was the final review session before the Meridian acquisition closed. It was apparently also the meeting where the board intended to formally announce the re-tendering of the electrical maintenance contract. Robert knew this because Frances had forwarded him the agenda that morning. He had read it on his phone while eating his Tim Hortons sandwich in the truck, before the truck was towed. The boardroom on the 6th floor was the kind of room that announced itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that probably cost more than Robert's first truck, water carafes at each seat like someone had decided hydration was an amenity. There were 11 people around the table. Most of them were in suits. Several of them had the particular alertness of people who had been briefed extensively on a situation they did not entirely understand. Sandra Keating was there. She was seated to the left of the woman at the head of the table. Dr. Margaret Foss, Chief Operating Officer and, as of 6 months ago, Acting CEO. Robert recognized her from the hospital newsletter that appeared in the staff lounge occasionally. He did not know her personally. He knew the man 2 seats down from her, Harold Briggs from Meridian's legal team. They had exchanged emails. When Robert walked in, there was a brief recalibration around the table. Not impolite, just the particular pause of people who had assembled a mental image of someone based on correspondence and were now adjusting it. Patrick pulled out a chair for him near the middle of the table, and then retreated to a seat along the wall, where several other junior staff were arranged with laptops and notepads. Margaret Foss looked at Robert with the measured assessment of someone who ran large institutions and had learned to read people quickly. "Mr. Haig," she said, "thank you for making the time." "Of course," Robert said. He set his bag on the floor beside the chair and unzipped it. He took out the manila folder. Sandra Keating, 2 seats away, was looking at him with an expression Robert recognized. It was the expression of someone who was trying to place something and couldn't quite. He didn't look at her. He opened the folder. The agenda had 3 items. The third was the retendering announcement. They worked through the first 2 efficiently. A facilities budget revision and an IT infrastructure update that involved a 15-minute presentation from a man named Cody Walsh that went 12 minutes longer than it needed to. When they reached item 3, Harold Briggs took over. He was precise and pleasant, the way lawyers often were in rooms where precision and pleasantness served the same function. He explained the Meridian acquisition timeline. He explained the transition plan. He explained the rationale for the retendering process as a risk management measure. In our review, Harold said, the current electrical maintenance arrangement was identified as a single point of failure risk. The recommendation from our operations team is to issue a competitive tender to 3 pre-approved vendors. The current vendor would be welcome to bid. He glanced at Robert when he said this. Not unkindly. Robert waited. Any questions before we move to the formal resolution? Margaret asked. 1 question, Robert said. The room waited. Has the board reviewed Schedule 7 of the Ontario Health Facilities Act as it applies to this contract? Harold Briggs looked up from his notes. It was a small movement, but the room noticed it. I'm sorry, Harold said. Schedule 7, Robert said. Legacy vendor protections. Appendix F of the acquisition agreement references the clause directly. The contract meets the threshold, 11 consecutive years uninterrupted. He paused. I'm not raising it as a complaint. I want to make sure the resolution is drafted correctly. If the clause applies, the retendering process has a different legal posture than what's been outlined here. The room was quiet. Harold Briggs picked up his pen and wrote something. Then he put the pen down and looked at Robert with a different quality of attention than he'd had 30 seconds ago. Where did you find that reference? He said. Appendix F, page 341, Robert said. I can show you the paragraph if that's useful. He slid a single sheet from the folder across the table. It was a printed page with the relevant paragraph circled in pen, ordinary ballpoint, the kind you buy in a 12-pack. Harold took the page. He read it. He read it again. Margaret, he said quietly. Sandra Keating was watching Robert now with an expression that had moved through several states and arrived somewhere he didn't bother to identify. She had placed where she'd seen him before. He could tell by the way she stopped moving. Margaret Foss leaned over to look at the document Harold was holding. She read it. Her face gave away less than Harold's, which was professional of her. We'll need to pause on item 3, she said. Cody, can you reach the Meridian legal lead? On it, said Cody, already moving. Margaret looked at Robert. Mr. Haig, where did you train? University of Waterloo, Robert said. Electrical engineering. Then 30 years in the field, the contract review. I read everything I signed, Robert said, and everything attached to it. A man at the far end of the table, Robert didn't know his name, one of the Meridian operations people, leaned toward his colleague and said something quietly. The colleague nodded. Harold Briggs set the paper down carefully, as if it had become fragile. We're going to need to adjourn item 3, he said. This requires a full review of the acquisition documents before we can proceed. He looked at Robert directly. Are you represented by counsel? I can be, Robert said. I'd suggest you get there before end of day, Harold said. It wasn't unfriendly. It was the advice of a lawyer who respected a situation. Robert nodded. He closed the folder. Margaret Foss asked him to stay when the others filed out. Sandra Keating left with the group, which was either courtesy or avoidance. Robert didn't spend time deciding which. The room was quiet with just the 2 of them. Outside the windows, the city moved in its usual way, indifferent to any particular moment in any particular room. Margaret sat across from him with her hands flat on the table. She was, Robert thought, a person who had learned to be still when she needed to think. I have to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. You've been in this building for 11 years. You work with the maintenance team. You show up in the parking lot in a truck that's older than some of the residents. She looked at him evenly. You read a 460-page acquisition document on your own time and found a clause that our legal team missed. Why? Robert considered the question. Because it was my contract, he said. Margaret looked at him. I don't follow things into rooms I'm not invited to, he said, but I pay attention to what's mine. The document was mine to read. The clause applied to me. I read it. He paused. I wasn't planning to use it as a weapon. I came here to make sure the resolution was legal. There's a difference." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "The retendering would have cost you the contract," she said. "Probably," Robert said. "And you would have bid again." "I would have bid again," he said. "I might have won. I might not have. That's how tendering works. Then why raise the clause at all?" Robert looked at her. "Because a legal document that doesn't reflect the laws is a liability to everyone who signs it, including you." Margaret looked out the window for a moment. Then she looked back. "Your daughter," she said. "Patrick mentioned you needed to be somewhere by 3. Robert looked at the time. 2:11. "I do," he said. "Your truck was towed this morning," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. "I authorized it," she said. "It came out evenly, but there was something underneath it. Sandra flagged the vehicle and I signed off. I didn't look at the name on the file." She paused. "I'm sorry, Mr. Haig. That was careless of me." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I'll need a ride to the impound lot," he said finally. "I'll drive you," Margaret said. She drove a 2022 Volvo Silver, with a travel mug in the cup holder and a reusable bag from a farmer's market folded on the back seat. Robert sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window at the city moving past. They didn't talk much on the way. Margaret drove with the focused economy of someone who didn't treat driving as social time. At a light on Weston Road, she said, "How long has she been in therapy?" 2 years, Robert said. "Stroke, she was 26. He looked out the window. "She's good. She's getting better, occupational therapy or physio, both. OT is Tuesday and Thursday. Physio is Monday." Margaret nodded. She didn't say she was sorry, which Robert appreciated. People said they were sorry so often it had lost most of its weight. She just drove. At the impound lot, Robert paid the fee, $210 cash, which he happened to have because he usually carried cash, and signed the release form. The truck was in the back row, looking exactly as it always looked, like a truck that had been used for 30 years by someone who maintained the engine and let the cosmetics take care of themselves. He unlocked it. The key fob had stopped working 2 years ago, and he'd never replaced it. Margaret was standing by her car in the lot, waiting, not scrolling her phone. He noticed that. He walked back toward her. "I need to go get my daughter," he said. "Of course," she said. She looked at the truck, then back at him. Not with the expression Sandra Keating had worn that morning. Something different, more considered. "Mr. Haig, the legal review will take a few weeks. Our team will be in touch." She paused. "I'd like to understand the contract situation fully before we make any decisions." "That's fair," he said. "I'd also like to apologize again for this morning." She looked at him squarely, the way she'd looked at everything, without flinching, not just the truck, for not paying attention to what I was signing. Robert looked at her for a moment. "It happens," he said. "It shouldn't," she said. "Not to me, not in my building." He didn't argue with her. It was an honest thing to say, and it deserved to stand without being softened. "Drive safe," he said. He got in the truck. It started on the first turn, the way it always did, because he kept the engine right even when everything else showed its age. His daughter's name was Iris. Iris Haig, 28 now, 2 years out from the stroke that had interrupted everything. Her career in landscape architecture, her apartment downtown, the version of her life she had been building with quiet determination. She was Robert's determination in a different register. Same patience, more optimism. She was waiting outside the clinic on a bench when he pulled up, her cane leaning against the armrest, a book open on her lap. When she saw the truck, she closed the book with one hand, the left hand still a little slow, and smiled. She got in with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned to do things differently than before. "You're late," she said. 4 minutes, he said. 5, she said. She looked at him. "What happened? My truck got towed." She turned to look at him fully. "When? This morning?" "I just got it back, Dad." She said it the way she always said it when she was trying to decide between exasperation and concern and landing somewhere between the two. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because I handled it," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked out the window, and he could see the corner of her mouth doing something that wasn't quite a smile. "You always handle it," she said. "That's the job," he said. He pulled out of the clinic parking lot and into traffic. The afternoon light was the flat gold of late September, laying itself across the street in long strips. Iris opened her book again, holding it in her lap with both hands. A small habit Robert had noticed. She practiced on purpose, to keep the left hand engaged. They drove east. The truck's engine ran steady and even, the way it always did. The city moved around them in the particular rhythm of a weekday afternoon. Buses, cyclists, delivery vans, the ordinary complicated traffic of people getting from one place to another. Robert drove and didn't talk, which was his nature, and Iris read, which was hers. After a few blocks, she said without looking up, "So who towed it?" "The hospital administration," he said. "Your hospital?" "I don't own it," he said. She turned a page. "The hospital where you have the contract?" "Yes. And I had a meeting with their board this afternoon." Iris lowered the book slowly. She looked at him. "About the truck?" "About the acquisition," he said. "The truck was separate." She stared at him. "Dad," she said, "tell me what happened. The whole thing. Start from the truck." So he told her in the way he told things, without embellishment, in order, leaving out nothing material. The tow, the impound slip, the board meeting, the clause on page 341, Harold Briggs' face when he read the paragraph, Margaret Foss driving him to the impound lot in a silver Volvo and waiting without looking at her phone. When he finished, Iris was quiet for a moment. "You had all that in a folder," she said. "In a grocery bag. It was a manila folder," he said. "Regular weight." She looked out the window. He could see her trying to decide what to do with the information. "Are you going to get a lawyer?" she said. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Good." She paused. "Did you eat?" "Sandwich from Tim's," he said. "Around 11. That's not enough." "I know. We'll stop somewhere," she said. "I know," he said again. They stopped at a diner on Eglinton that they both liked for reasons that had nothing to do with the food. The booths were wide enough to be comfortable, the service was quick, and nobody bothered them. Robert ordered coffee and a bowl of soup. Iris ordered the same, plus toast, because she said the soup wouldn't be enough for him even if he thought it would. She was right, which was not unusual. They sat across from each other in the booth with the kind of ease that takes years to develop and can't be manufactured. The diner was half full, weekday afternoon quiet, the sound of cutlery and low conversation, and a radio behind the counter playing something neither of them could quite identify. "The woman who called it in," Iris said. "The one in the blazer." "Sandra Keating," Robert said. "Is she going to be a problem?" Robert thought about the expression on Sandra's face when she'd placed him, when the pieces had connected and she'd understood what she was looking at. Not guilt, exactly. More like the recalibration of someone who had made an assessment and found it had been wrong. "I don't think so," he said. "Because she knows she messed up?" "Because she knows I'm not interested in making her life difficult," Robert said. "I just want the contract to be what it is." Iris wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, the left one steadier than it had been 6 months ago. He noticed without remarking on it. "You know what the stupid part is?" she said. "What?" "You've been working in that building for 11 years, she said, "and they looked at you and saw someone to tow." Robert picked up his spoon. "Most people see what they expect to see," he said. "That shouldn't be enough," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it's usually what happens." Iris looked at him. She had her mother's eyes and his patience and a stubbornness that was entirely her own. "You're not angry," she said. "I was annoyed about the $210, he said. She almost laughed. She caught it the way she sometimes caught things deliberately, choosing her reaction. "That's not what I mean." "I know," he said. He set down the spoon. "There's not much in it for me, being angry. The clause is there or it isn't. The contract is valid or it isn't. Being angry doesn't change the paperwork. Most people would be angry anyway," she said. "Most people can afford to be," he said. She thought about that. The soup arrived. It was adequate, which was all either of them had expected. They ate without talking for a while, which was comfortable between them in the way that silence is comfortable when there's enough shared history to fill it. Outside, the September light was thinning toward evening. The street had changed rhythm, more pedestrians, fewer delivery vehicles, the city shifting gears toward the part of the day when people were going home rather than somewhere else. Eventually, Iris said, "The woman who drove you to the lot, Margaret Foss," she apologized. "She did," Robert said. "A real one." He thought about it, the way Margaret had said it, looking at him squarely, not softening it, saying it shouldn't happen rather than just that it had. "Yes," he said. "A real one." Iris nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. She picked up her toast. "I like her better than the Blazer woman." "The Blazer woman wasn't wrong about the parking zone," Robert said. Iris pointed the toast at him. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Being fair to people who weren't fair to you." Robert drank his coffee. "It doesn't cost me anything," he said. "It cost you $210, she said. He looked at her. "It cost me $210, he agreed. She smiled. It was the full version, both sides, the one that still occasionally surprised him with how much it looked like her at 12 years old, at 7, at 3, the layers of her compressed into one expression and then released. He paid the bill as he always did, and they drove home through the early evening, the truck steady and unhurried, the city golden and then gray and then lit by the ordinary lights of people settling in for the night. The legal review took 4 weeks. At the end of it, Harold Briggs sent a letter to Robert's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chow, who charged more per hour than Robert earned in a day and was worth every dollar of it, confirming that Schedule 7 of the Ontario Health Facilities Act applied to the Haig technical contract, and that the retendering resolution could not proceed as drafted without exposing Meridian to a significant breach of contract liability. The contract was renewed not as a favor, not as an apology, as a legal outcome of an 11-year relationship documented in paperwork that Robert had read, signed, and kept in files organized by year in a cabinet in his office that also held Iris's old-school drawings and a photo of his wife, taken in 1994 on a Tuesday afternoon in Algonquin Park, the light the way September light sometimes is, clear and unhurried, as if time had paused to let itself be seen. Sandra Keating sent a short email to Patricia's office addressed to Robert, expressing that she hoped the process had concluded satisfactorily. It was formal and brief. Robert read it, replied with 2 sentences saying the outcome was fair, and didn't think about it again. Margaret Foss called directly. "The board has asked me to extend a formal acknowledgement," she said, "for the process and for your patience with us." "The process did what it was supposed to do," Robert said. "I know," she said. "I'm saying it anyway," he let her say it. There was a pause on the line, the kind that doesn't require filling. "Your daughter," Margaret said. "How is she doing?" "Better," Robert said. "Every week a little better." "Good," Margaret said, and she said it the same way Iris had said it in the diner, simply, without ceremony, as if the word was sufficient on its own. After the call, Robert sat at his desk for a few minutes. Through the window of his office, a converted room at the back of the house, overlooking a yard he hadn't gotten around to cutting before the frost, the trees had gone bare, and the sky was the particular gray of a November afternoon in Ontario. Not dramatic, not dispiriting, just the season doing what seasons do. He thought about the morning with the tow truck, the chain hooking the axle, the woman in the blazer with her arms crossed, the impound slip folded in his pocket. He thought about page 341, 11 lines of text, Appendix F. He thought about Iris in the diner pointing toast at him and telling him he was being fair to people who hadn't been fair to him. "It doesn't cost me anything," he'd said. He wasn't sure that was entirely true, but it was what he believed, and he didn't know how to believe otherwise, and he had long since decided that was not a flaw. He put on his jacket and went out to the yard to get the rake. The leaves weren't going to move themselves, and Iris was coming for dinner on Sunday, and he liked the yard to look right when she came. He worked until the light was gone, which didn't take long. When the yard was done, he stood for a moment in the quiet, with the rake in his hands, the cold air doing what cold air does in November, settling into everything, patient, thorough, unhurried. Then he went inside.